Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Um,
The
it's
first
just-
one.
I repeat what you were saying.
No, I just say you're the first one.
Oh, okay. Well,
They'll be here. Let's get this. Good morning. Good morning.
morning. Oh, oh, morning, Miss Jackson. The 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 Tremblay thing kind of threw me. I see. Like, who's Miss Tremblay? I see. Yes. It's so funny. I was at Walmart picking up something before work, and someone was in line in the full kind of Halloween witch theme. And I was thinking like, yeah, America's costume party is the one day you get to dress up like Richard Nixon and no one is trying to lock you up. So
I got it was Halloween.
now are you Glinda or
I know the good witch.
are you the Wicked Witch of the West? Which
You're on mute, Joanne. Maybe that's a
It depends on like who you are, right? How you might interpret me. Let's put it that way. All right. Or
Yes.
where in the day I am. You know?
Yes.
So some folks, would say I'm the bestest witch that ever lived, and others would say, not so much. So I don't always deliver good news. I try, but it's not always good.
I'm just checking in with a few folks and we'll get started.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My apologies. After Sundays, a long day, I have church I have church all day, and Mondays are hard. So, how's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. And I can appreciate that. Yes. Sunday is a very long day for you.
It's a very long day, and I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, oh, I got a meeting this morning. My wife took the kids to school today. She was like, yeah, you could rest a little bit. Not quite, right?
Maybe after this meeting, you're going to get to rest a bit.
Oh, no, I'm going to work.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. It's okay. But I'm here. Give me a moment to just get adjusted really quickly so I can pull up the agenda. Unless we could pull up the agenda on the screen, that will be helpful. I know we got a couple things to get through today. Okay, so we're going to start with the First reading of physical force, use of physical force.
Correct.
Okay. And just a quick question, Dr. Silver and Christina, when we looked at the groups that came in the public comment, just want to get a quick update of where we are, inviting them to hear their public safety plan that they presented. Has there been any movement or any conversation with it?
Yeah, the plan is to invite them to the December policy committee, yes. And after we review the documents that they submitted. Oh, sorry. So
Yeah.
yes, we plan to reach out.
Okay. And I just want to say it publicly that, you know, anything that's brought before our attention during public comment, and if there's legitimate work that has been done on it, I want to recognize it and hear it, because I know a lot of the community groups that do come, most of them have volunteer members that participate in those things. And I always respect volunteers that take their time away from their families to present something to our board. And I just want to say that publicly so everyone understands at least where I'm coming from. As an organizer, I work with folks that typically don't have time to be in meetings and be planning things. And I deeply respect your time. So if they're going to take time to present something to our board, I want to give them time to be heard and to be listened to. So I just want to say that publicly, because I deeply respect public work. With that being said, Ms. Santiago, Dr. Silver, we will now go through and now begin our November. Is it November 1st already?
October 31st.
October 31st. This is a long month, and October looked like it has something to do. So it's quickly gotten out of here, right? So I want to so are we considering this our November policy meeting?
It's a November cycle because, yeah, they usually landed on the last week just to make sure we have enough time before the regular meeting to go through all the committees. Sometimes it works out that way.
Yeah. So we're going to begin our late October, early November policy meeting. And I just want to greet everyone. Thank you all so much. And let's go ahead and get started so we can get through. I want to turn it over to Dr. Silver to just bring us through our first reading of our use of physical force policy. Good morning to all. Dr. Silver.
Good morning. Yes. And happy October 31st to everyone. Thank you so much, Pastor AJ. We are going to start with our use of physical force. This is a mandated CABE policy, and we did, I don't know if that makes it too small, maybe that's better. I'm going to show all markup. So at our last meeting, we had a number of edits in this document, and we have followed up with council on some of them, and some of them we're still waiting to hear. So we have followed up with council on this one and have not gotten any revisions to this language. Ms. Mizrak, did you have any additional insights on this particular paragraph here? Can everyone hear me?
Yep. No.
I can hear you, but you're very soft.
Okay. All right. Let me talk a little bit louder. Is that better?
Yeah, a bit.
Okay. All right. Just leaning in a little bit more. So we did have a revision where we added some language here. And we had shared this with council, and I just wondered if there were, if Ms. Mizrak, if you had any additional insights into the language in this paragraph.
No, I provided some comments last week on Friday, and beyond that, I did not have any more insight. I didn't really think that the additional language was necessary. I thought that the definitions as they were covered the concerns that we had. But, you know, I appreciate where everyone's coming from in that additional language. But I felt that that type of concern around, you know, lifting a child if it's necessary to safely move them, like from the bus to inside the school, would already be covered under the language in the statute that excludes the physical restraint. So that was really my thought on that one.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question that may be brought in later, but I've been getting a phone call or two about special needs students being restrained, particularly those with autism or on the spectrum. And I'm not sure if our policy addresses that, you know, later in this policy. But I just wanted to raise that as just something for us to take a peek at, because there may be some more we need to add to it.
Okay, thank you so much, Pastor AJ. So our next, and I really appreciate the careful read on this. The next question was about whether or not we needed to include pre-K when we are defining what a student is for the Hartford Public Schools. And again, I'm gonna ask Ms. Mizarek to share a little bit about that.
Sure. So again, I mean, generally, I think we should be tracking what our statutes say when we're going to make our policies, and we should be tracking that language. And so the language of the statute doesn't include pre-K, but I think there's probably ways to explain why that might have been the case. I mean, you know, pre-K isn't mandatory, right, in our public schools. Also, there is language that talks about any student in a program administered by a regional educational service center. And perhaps the thought was in the past, those types of educational service centers maybe provided more pre-K than public school districts did. At the end of the day, I think the goal of the statute, right, is to define and limit and provide guidelines around physical restraint of students. So I think if we do have pre-K students, that goal of the statute would want to reach all of our students. So I think it would be appropriate to include pre-K in this section, even though we don't see it in the statute. I think there's perhaps reasonable reasons why we don't see it in the statute. And I think that if one of the goals of the policy is to make sure that we have parameters and guidelines around when we're using physical restraints and how we're doing that, we'd want to achieve that for all of our students. So I would be okay with adding the pre-K language in the policy here.
Okay, thank you so much, Lori. So that has been added here. And I can't resolve it right now, but it is resolved. So, and we talked about conditions. Thank you so much. Conditions pertaining to the use of physical restraint and/or seclusion. And I am looking for where we paused on this.
I have a question. I didn't know if we
Go ahead,
for questions here.
Well, hold on one second. Dr. Silver, do you feel that this is appropriate time, or is there more that you want to get through?
No, I think a question is good. I want to make sure that we capture it as we go through the policy.
Very good. Go ahead, Board Member Walker. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm asking this particularly as relates to item B, and then and by extension, the whole policy. So what I'm really getting at is in practice, is this policy kind of undermining kind of in-school suspension? I think I see here in B that for more than 15 minutes, the experts involved had to make this call. And what I've heard from some teachers is a disruptive student that they're asking to be removed somehow get removed only under this policy, right? And so a disruptive student is removed, but then within 15 minutes, that student's coming back. And what some teachers want is the ability to have a disruptive student actually removed for the period of the class or into some other setting because they're not integrating with the class well at that time. So I guess I'm saying this policy doesn't handle that, but the way this policy is written, it makes it seem like you can't have in-school suspension because it makes it seem like I can't hold the child for more than 15 minutes. Is that the reading I'm getting of B that says you can't hold a student more than 15 minutes against their will, or how do I interpret that? Like, can we actually still have in-school suspension?
To answer the question, I think I want to ask Attorney Misrak her interpretation of this point B.
So I think the policy has a very specific definition of what seclusion is, right? And physical restraint. And
May I?
yes.
Okay, so I deal with this in practice often, right? So what we still have in-school suspension, and in-school suspension is because you misbehaved today and you're going to serve an in-school suspension tomorrow, and in-school suspension is not locked and you are not, the door isn't locked. You are not secluded, you are not restrained. You realize you need to stay there for the day or half day or 2 days because you're serving your time and doing your work in that room. That's in school suspension, as opposed to out of school suspension. For a seclusion, it means that you were having great difficulty, potentially self-harming or harming someone else, or trying to harm someone else, and the staff escorted you probably with, a physical, as much force as needed to get you out of that space, get you into another space where they are holding the door so that you cannot leave that area. Now you're secluded. When we bring you to an area that you do not want to remain in of your own accord, and we're asking you to stay there and keeping you from leaving that area, that is considered a seclusion. A restraint is when you're not able to get away from us. So we're not just escorting you, but we're actually holding you so you can't move your arms away from us. And we're helping you get from one place to another, or keeping you from hurting somebody else or yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Trimley Jackson. Those definitions are clear. Now, I guess I'm trying to get my question. I think you almost answered it. So you've set up that there is in-school suspension. What my question is, as it relates to this policy, then, is what stops that student? Or I guess I've heard that students walk away from in-school suspension and no one feels empowered to, in essence, stop that student, to make that student stay in that in-school suspension area. And so that's where I'm kind of, and I totally get the
and unless they're a danger to themselves or others, that's where we end up sometimes, although people don't like it. All right, keeping an eye on someone. All right, we do what we call eye to eye. We're not going to play a cat and mouse game running after you throughout the entire school, because a lot of young people like a game of chase, or hide and seek. So we just kind of keep an eye on you and try and encourage you to go back where you belong, all right, rather than roaming the school. But if you're not a danger to yourself or others, and you're not then we're not going to restrain you or seclude you. We'll use all kinds of other things. We'll try and talk you through it. We'll try and guide you, incentivize you, maybe call home to have them help us, but we're not going to restrain or seclude you and put our hands on or, lock a door and keep you there if you're not a danger to yourself or others.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And so the reason for this discussion is to point out the gap, as Ms. Tremblay Jackson talked about, because I agree with her that for a child that doesn't stay in in-school suspension, it probably isn't appropriate to tackle them, restrain them, or lock them up, as it were. But I just want to get on the record that there's a gap there then that potentially we need to look at some point, other tools to be used to help a child actually complete their in-school suspension, because I think that has a value too. So I'll just leave that as a gap that we're not solving today, but maybe we can revisit it some other time under a different policy.
Thank you for that. But I also hear what Ms. Jackson is saying, in practice, right? I hear what she's saying and hear what she's not saying. So, and I just want to be clear, policy can only do so much in practical real life situations, right? So I just want to lift that as well. But Dr. Silver, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Board Member Walker. So we did the new student item C shall be placed in seclusion unless, and there are 4 reasons for seclusion here. And again, this has been reviewed closely by Ms. Tremblay Walker, Ms. Tremblay Jackson and our team, Ms. Hoffman as well. So again, these are the stipulations for when seclusion can be used as an emergency intervention, and the student is continually monitored. The area where the student is secluded is equipped with a window or clear line of sight beyond the seclusion area, and seclusion shall not be utilized as a planned intervention in a student's behavioral intervention plan. So it's not a standard practice. It's a practice that is used only when the circumstances call for it. Item D, school employees may not use a psychopharmacologic agent on a student without that student's consent, except as an emergency intervention to prevent immediate or imminent injury to the student or others, or as an integral part of the student's established medical or behavioral support or education plan, as developed consistent with Section 17A-543 of the Connecticut General Statutes, or if no plan has been developed as part of a licensed practitioner's initial orders. The use of some psychopharmacologic agents alone or in combination may be used only in doses that are therapeutically appropriate and not as a substitute for other appropriate treatments. I'm going to keep going. In the event that item E, in the event that physical restraint or seclusion is used on a student 4 or more times within 20 school days, an administrator or one or more of such students' teachers, the parent guardian of such student, and if any, a mental health professional shall convene for the purpose of 3 reasons here: conducting or revising a behavioral assessment of the student, creating or revising any applicable behavioral intervention plan, and determining whether such student may require special education. Item B, again, if it's used 4 or more times within 20 school days, if such student is a child requiring special education or is a child being evaluated for eligibility for special education and awaiting a determination, such student's planning and placement team shall convene for the purpose of 1, conducting or revising a behavioral assessment of the student, and 2, creating or revising any applicable behavioral intervention plan, including but not limited to such student's individualized education plan. Item F, The parent guardian of a student who is placed in physical restraint or seclusion shall be notified not later than 24 hours after the student is placed in physical restraint or seclusion. A reasonable effort shall be made to provide such notification immediately after such physical restraint or seclusion is initiated. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Board
Mr.
Member
Chair.
Walker?
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you. Just a question before you get too far. This is for you or maybe Ms. Tremblay Jackson again, but okay, the 4 times or 5 times within whatever 20 days or whatnot. I guess my question is is this meeting the same as a PPT or is it a PPT? Like, I mean, the meeting that's launched, is this a structured meeting that, you know, where the players and the people and the how it goes is all kind of understood?
Yes and no. If the student has a IEP, so they're already a special education student, then yes, it is a special education, individualized education plan meeting, an IEP, PPT meeting. If the student is a 504 student, then it's a 504 meeting that's held to review what's going on. If the student is neither of those and is a regular ed student, and this has occurred for a regular ed student, then there's an MTSS family and the multi therapeutics, systems of support team would get together to review what's going on with this given child. And, do we need to do something further? What's going on here?
Okay. Okay.
So the players are in essence the same, but what it's called is different.
Right. Okay. Then one last question there. Then do the parents have to consent then? Because it sounds like you're saying this child's gonna be evaluated as being a special needs child, and like, does the
No, if
parents have
they're
to?
already, sorry, I'm interrupting. If they're already a special needs child, then it is a meeting of the PPT group, all right? Because they're already a child with special needs and a specialized plan.
No,
and-
no. Sorry to interrupt you, but that quote unquote
The
regular student.
MTSS, right?
Right. So
Multi-systems of support. Yeah.
it sounds like you're almost saying that child needs to be evaluated for special ed or for some circumstance. Does the parent have to agree to that, or?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily evaluate, right? The team has to get together to discuss like the root cause, what's going on here that's, making this child act this way in school. What else is going on?
Okay.
Sometimes it means that we have to refer to services, outside of school. Sometimes it's because they just witnessed some kind of trauma or they just lost somebody or, it depends on what's going on.
Okay. So, all right. So it's not deterministic. It's just an exploration that's
Correct.
happening here.
Right. And then trying to figure out what could we do together so the child doesn't end up, unraveling this way in school.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Tremblay Jackson. We discussed point F about notification of parents. Point G, employees shall not use a physical restraint on a student or place a student in seclusion unless he or she has received training on the proper means of performing such physical restraint or seclusion. Point H, the Board of Education shall and each the Board of Education and each institution or facility operating under contract with the board to provide special education for children, including any approved private special education program, shall. And there are 4 points here. Record each instance of physical restraint or seclusion on a student. Specify whether the use of seclusion was in accordance with an individualized education program. Specify the nature of the emergency that necessitated the use of such physical restraint or seclusion, and include such information in an annual compilation on its use of such restraint and seclusion on students. Point I, the board and institutions or facilities operating under contract with the board to provide special education for children, including any approved private special education program, shall provide such annual compilation to the Department of Education in order to examine incidents of physical restraint and seclusion in school. Item J, any use of physical restraint or seclusion on a student shall be documented in the student's educational record. The documentation shall include A, the nature of the emergency and what other steps, including attempts at verbal de-escalation, were taken to prevent the emergency from arising if there were indications that such an emergency was likely to arise, and B, a detailed description of the nature of the restraint or seclusion, the duration of such restraint or seclusion, and the effect of such restraint or seclusion on the student's established educational plan. And item K, any incident of the use of restraint or seclusion that results in physical injury to a student shall be reported to the State Board of Education. Okay, required training and prevention training plan. And this is where we had an update too, that it is a biannual, biennial, right? Happens every other year. So let's talk about this. Training shall be provided by the Board of Education members Training shall be provided by the board to the members of a crisis intervention team for each school in the district. The board may provide such training to any teacher, administrator, school professional, or other school employee designated by the school principal and who has direct contact with students regarding physical restraint and seclusion of students. Such training shall be provided during the school year commencing July 1st, 2017, and this is where this revision needs to take place, if I'm correct, Ms. Tremblay Jackson. It should be every other school year thereafter.
See, this is where we have two different things going on. We do update the entire crisis team about any changes to restraint seclusion law and remind all principals, administrators, and the crisis teams about the rules and regulations around restraint and seclusion. But we are also allowed to pick a restraint seclusion program to show staff how to restrain and seclude safely. And we can follow the guidelines of that program by state statute. So the program or the entity that we chose is Crisis Prevention and Intervention, CPI. And CPI allows us to train staff every 2 years and renew their training every 2 years in the actual application of restraint and seclusion. So that's where I'm like wanting that separated. We do train everyone on any changes to restraint or seclusion by the State Department of Education or the state statute or law, and remind people about 4 and 20s and when you're allowed to restrain or seclude or when you're not. That's the general update to everyone. But then there's the actual training of the crisis team on how to de-escalate and how to properly hold or restrain if necessary. And that's done every 2 years with CPI. And from my understanding of the writing allows us to separate those two.
And the updates, do we typically do that every year, or is that the process?
From what I understood in my reading, all right, but I'm allowing for other people to correct me, okay, is that, for the highlights that we were given, as well as then I went ahead, as much to my own dismay, and read the actual statute, is that we're allowed to separate out the programming piece, the program that we pick, and follow their guidelines, as long as it's an approved program under the State Department of Education. But we are supposed to update and make sure everybody knows any updates annually.
Right. And I think if we're doing that, then that's in compliance with what the statute.
Right. And I just want to make sure that we write it such that it reflects the division of that.
Yeah.
So that CPI is not being
Here.
done every single year to all of the crisis team members. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yep.
Because that's a 2-day training.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ms. Tremblay Jackson and Ms. Nisarek. So the updates need to be provided every year, but the training itself, so I think it's the use of the word training here.
The actual like CPI certification is what happens every 2 years. Is that
Right,
Right,
and
yeah,
then
okay.
there's, here, I can pull it up again. There's a way that they separate it out that I don't remember the actual wording. So I'll look that up if you give me a minute.
Okay. But I think here, we are required to provide our staff who are certified CPI, certified with the CPI training, we are required to provide them with annual updates about restraint and seclusion.
Right, about any of the law, right.
So I think if we say such updates shall be provided during the school
There you
year,
go, such updates, all right? And then the specific training biannual, is that how one says that?
and in accordance with the program.
Program, right.
So such updates shall be provided during the school year. Okay. Okay. And so these are what's required of an update, an overview of the relevant laws and regulations regarding the use of physical restraint and seclusion on students and the proper uses of physical restraint and seclusion. Such overview is to be provided by the Department of Education commencing July 1st and annually thereafter in a manner and form as prescribed by the Commissioner of Education. The creation of a plan by which the board will provide training regarding the prevention of incidents requiring physical restraint or seclusion of students. Such plan is to be implemented not later than July 1st, 2018. So that is where the policy speaks to the training plan.
Right.
Okay. The board will create a plan to be implemented not later than July 1st, 2018, requiring training regarding the proper means of physical restraint or seclusion of a student, including but not limited to, and then we have a number of points here,
Mhm.
verbal diffusing and de-escalation, prevention strategies. And I think this also speaks to Mr. Walker's questions about what strategies are engaged in order to prevent or reduce the likelihood of physical restraint and seclusion. So verbal diffusing and de-escalation, prevention strategies, various types of physical restraint and seclusion, the differences between life-threatening physical restraint and other varying levels of physical restraint, the differences between permissible physical restraint and pain compliance techniques, monitoring methods to prevent harm to a student who is physically restrained or in seclusion, including training in the proper means of physically restraining or secluding a student. And G, reporting and reporting procedures on the use of physical restraint and seclusion. Okay, and this has been resolved. I am not able to resolve the comment. Crisis intervention teams. For the school year commencing July 1st, 2017, and each school year thereafter, the board requires each school district to identify a crisis intervention team. Such team shall consist of any teacher, administrator, school professional, or other school employee designated by the school principal and who has direct contact with student and trained, I think this is students with an S, and trained in the use of physical restraint and seclusion. Such teams shall respond to any incident in which the use of physical restraint or seclusion may be necessary as an emergency intervention to prevent immediate or imminent injury to a student or to others. Each member of the crisis intervention team shall be recertified in the use of physical restraint and seclusion. And this is on a, this is on an annual basis. I'm going to say add in accordance with the program. The training.
Yes, that's where it needs to be. Yep.
There we go. In accordance with the program training requirements, the board shall maintain a list of the members of the crisis intervention team for each student. Oh, Mr. Walker, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna roll through the chair here. And
Yeah, I can't see with the screen up. I can't see a hand.
it's fine. That's a super quickie question. Now, is this biannual training, is it actual certification? So is it that, I guess I'm asking you, Ms. Chimley Jackson, so this is actually a certification thing? So you actually do get certified? Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay, so it is literally then required that at least every 2 years you have to go because there's a certification that is of record and whatnot.
correct.
Okay,
And they get
All
a
right.
blue card.
okay, that's
It's a little
good.
blue card. All right,
Okay.
it says they're certified in CPI,
Okay,
which is
perfect.
crisis prevention and intervention.
Okay, thank you. And
You're welcome.
Dr. Silva, the reason I was asking, because in my head, I'm using the certified kind of training to separate out from the updates and stuff like that, because there's clearly a distinction between certification training and the general updates and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And now, okay, so that is, I lost my place.
You're right where you are. You're defining right there is right where you were no later than January 1st.
Okay. So we have not later than January 1st, 2019, the board establishes this portion of this policy regarding the use of an exclusionary timeout as defined in this policy. This policy regarding exclusionary timeout includes, but need not be limited to, the following refinements. Number one, exclusionary timeouts are not to be used as a form of discipline. Number two, at least one school employee remain with the student or be immediately available to the student, such that the student and school employee are able to communicate verbally throughout the exclusionary timeout. Number three, the space used for an exclusionary timeout is clean, safe, sanitary, and appropriate for the purpose of calming such student or de-escalating such student's behavior. Number four, the exclusionary timeout period terminate as soon as possible. And number five, if such student is a child requiring special education as it's defined by our Connecticut General Statute 10-76A, or a child being evaluated for special education pursuant to Connecticut General Statute 10-76D and awaiting a determination, and the interventions or strategies are unsuccessful in addressing such students' problematic behavior, such students' planning and placement team shall convene as soon as is practicable to determine alternative interventions or strategies. Dissemination of the policy. This policy and its procedures shall be made available on the district's website and in the board's procedural manual. So there are some references here to our policies about employee protection, students with special health care needs, and the use of exclusionary timeout settings. And that's our next policy that we're moving to, the 5144.2, also on our agenda. An update of the legal references and preparation for the first reading for our Board of Education and eventual adoption. So that brings us to the end of our policy, and I'm going to save it and stop my share. And by your leave, Pastor AJ, I will transition to our next policy.
Yes, by all means. Thank you for all the feedback on that particular policy. We, you know, it's a lot, and I appreciate those that are in the middle of the grind, trying to implement it and living it at the same time. So I appreciate that. We're clear to move forward.
Thank you, sir. Transitioning to our, I believe this is the right one. The use of exclusionary timeout, which is 5144.2. And this is the first time that we're coming to this policy. It was on our agenda last time, but we had quite a bit of discussion, but I think we're prepared based on the last policy that we just finished. But I will read through this one. This is a student policy, use of exclusionary time out, very specific policy and a mandated policy. The Hartford Board of Education seeks to foster a safe and positive learning environment for all students. Board of Education employees will restrict the use of physical restraint and seclusion of students to emergency situations in accordance with this policy and accompanying administrative regulations and applicable law. The physical restraint or seclusion of a student may be necessary in an emergency situation to maintain the safety of the student or another individual. The board also regulates the use of exclusionary time out in accordance with this policy and accompanying regulations and applicable law. The Board of Education authorizes the superintendent or his/her designee to develop and implement administrative regulations in accordance with this policy and applicable law. The Board of Education mandates compliance with this policy and the associated administrative regulations at all times. Violations of this policy and/or associated administrative regulations by a Board of Education staff member or other individual working at the direction of or under the supervision of the Board of Education may result in disciplinary action up to and including a possible termination of employment status and/or termination of contract for services. Nothing within these regulations shall be construed to interfere with the board's responsibility to maintain a safe school setting in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 10-220. Under no circumstances shall employees or individuals under the supervision of the board use corporal punishment with students or physically manage students for the purposes of discipline. And for the purposes of this policy, which that was a pretty quick read, we do need to add the definition of corporal punishment. And I'm going to ask if I can get some support for this definition from Ms. Miserak.
Yeah, I should probably take a little time to get you something, so I give it to you right now, but I certainly will try to come up with a good definition.
Okay, that's great. So what I will do is when Ms. Miserak, this is the first reading of this policy, so when Ms. Miserak can provide the approved definition, we will add that to the policy in preparation for, if it's okay with our board chair and members of our committee, in preparation for the first reading of this policy at our next board meeting.
I'd be good with it. Past AJ. You
Yes.
good with? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I apologize about that.
No, you're fine.
Okay, so I have a note there, and this is wonderful to have completed this. It's going to save our work. And the
And
final,
let me just ask a clarifying question. Attorney Mazurek is going to get back to us. Is
yes, sir.
that what I took from? Okay.
And we will have that embedded in the policy before it's included with our first reading to the board in November. Okay, and I just want to thank our special education team members for coming and supporting all of the revisions to these two policies. It's been extremely helpful, so thank you very much. And by your leave, Pastor AJ, I'll move on to pesticide applications.
My favorite. Go for it.
And this is a required policy from CABE. It was missing from our manual, but certainly in reviewing with Chief Davis Googe and members of her team, we have been in compliance with the law, but we do not have a policy in our manual for this. So we are adding this policy. And this is a policy that is from the CABE Model Policy Manual, adapted to Hartford Public Schools. Policy 3524.1, Business and Non-Instructional Operations, Hazardous Materials in Schools, Pesticide Application. The intent of this policy is to ensure that students, employees, and parents, guardians receive adequate notice in conformity with applicable statutes prior to pesticide application in school buildings and on school grounds. Further, the district will only employ certified pesticide applicators for any non-emergency pesticide use in school buildings or on school grounds. The application of lawn care pesticides on the grounds of schools with students in grade 8 or lower must be according to an integrated pest management plan. Such application is prohibited except in emergencies. An emergency application may be made to eliminate a human health threat in any school with students through grade 8, as determined by the superintendent of schools, subject to applicable Connecticut statutory and regulatory provisions. And seeing no hands, I'm going to move forward. The district shall, I'm not sure these are about these are bullets here. The district shall provide notice of planned pesticide application to students, parents, guardians, and employees in the manner required by law, utilizing websites, schools, or district social media accounts, electronic mail notification, or alert system. Post the areas scheduled to receive pesticide applications. Maintain written records for 5 years of all pesticide applications. Provide continuing instruction to those students who, based upon written medical request, find it necessary to absent themselves during the period of application. Inform annually parents, guardians, and staff of the district's pest application management policy. Establish a registry of parents, guardians, and staff who want to receive advance notice of all pesticide use and provide such notice as required by law. Pest control applicators employed by the district shall provide the school contact person, the supervisor of maintenance, the head custodian, with notice at least 72 hours prior to the date and time the pesticide application is to occur, including in such notice the brand name, concentration, rate of application, pesticide label, material safety data sheet, list of the area or areas where the pesticide is to be applied, and any use restrictions required by the pesticide label. Prior to the application, the applicator shall provide the school contact person with a written pre-application notification containing the following information: the brand name, rate of application, and any use restrictions required by the label of the herbicide or specified pesticide, the name of the active ingredient of the pesticide being applied, the target pest, the area or areas where the pesticide is to be applied, the date and time the application is to occur, the pesticide label and the material safety data sheet. In case of pesticide applications performed for or by public health agencies or emergency applications because of immediate threat to the public health, the licensed applicator shall give the school site office oral and, if possible, written notice with posting of the area to be treated. The superintendent or his/her designee may provide the pest control applicator to make the required postings in accordance with all applicable statutes and with district policy and regulations. The name and address of the applicator shall be part of any posting. Someone other than a certified pesticide applicator may apply a pesticide in an emergency to to eliminate an immediate human health threat when, number one, it is impractical to obtain the services of a certified pesticide applicator, and number two, a restricted use pesticide is not used as defined in Connecticut General Statute 22A-47. Pesticide purchases shall be limited to amounts authorized by the superintendent or his/her designee for use during the year. Pesticides shall not be stored in a secure site not accessible. Pesticides shall be stored in a secure site not accessible to students or unauthorized staff. They shall be stored and disposed of in accordance with EPA registered label directions and applicable state statutes. Our definitions here. Pesticides are defined as fungicides used on plants, insecticides, herbicides, or rodenticides, but not sanitizers, disinfectants, or antimicrobial agents or pesticide bait. Microbial pesticide means a pesticide that consists of a microorganism as the active ingredient. Biochemical pesticide means a naturally occurring substance that controls pests by non-toxic mechanism. Integrated pest oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Walker. I didn't see your hand.
No, anyway, thank you. I did have a question about at the first section. Your definitions are fine. Yeah, so Mr. Chair, if you don't object, I'll ask a question here.
No objections, and I apologize. Like I said, with the screen up, I can't see the.
Yeah, it would
go ahead, no problem.
Totally fine. All right, so two questions, and they may be one is just process. Okay, it has here under the district shall, and the first thing it should do is provide notice. I mean, and everyone seems to be covered. Now, my question is, given that, is there a need to do bullet, I'm going to call it bullet 6. Is there a need to establish a registry? I'm not understanding what advance notice means versus the notice you can send out to everybody anyway. That's just putting out as a question. I know it's maybe modeled, but that seems like extra work to me for some reason. And the other question is around, maybe it's the David Gooch, I guess. You have this contact person that's going to be given all this information. And my question is are our school contact persons going to get the appropriate training so they understand how to interpret, understand all this pesticide information they're given? So, you know, they can be, you get the point. Are they going to be educated at all so they can be a sophisticated interface with pesticide folks? I guess those are my two questions. Training for the contact person, and do we need to do both a registry and do the notice to everyone?
Thank you, Mr. Walker. I believe Chief Davis Gooch can help us with that question.
Yes. Ugh. Yes. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I was trying to get off mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Two things. One, I just want to share that it's very rare that we use pesticides and herbicides. And two, the notification would actually go to the school community, meaning that the principal, parents, school staff, and generally the head custodian is the one that would support along with him or his or her supervisor in sharing out the actual details around the pesticide. So yes, when you say training, I think training the head custodian would certainly have enough information, and also he would be supported by his supervisor.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that, yeah, that at least we know that they need some kind of support. Yeah. David, then what about that idea of additional registry? Does the law make us have to have a separate registry in addition to notice?
Yeah, I think as you said, that sounds like it was language suggested by CABE. But again, we would rely on our normal communication protocol. We have email addresses in PowerSchool, and we would use Parent Square, and also, again, whatever means the principal thought would be necessary to share with their community. So I think that's just language that was in the policy. Dr. Silver, I would rely on you to decide if we need to keep it in.
Thank you so much, Chief Davis Gooch. It is best practice. And I imagine, not being a medical professional, I imagine there are sensitivities that some youth have, especially students who are medically compromised or fragile, who may need to be notified because it could pose as an irritant or in some way affect their people who are immune compromised, affect their health and well-being, even though it may be safe for the general public.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Walker, if that resolves your question, thank you so much, Chief Davis Gooch, for leaning in there. I'm going to move on to the rest of our definitions. Biochemical pesticide means a naturally occurring substance that controls pests by non-toxic mechanism. I think we did that one. Integrated pest management is the use of all available pest control measures, including the judicious use of pesticides, when warranted, to maintain a pest population at or below an acceptable level while decreasing the use of pesticides. Such plan is consistent with an applicable model plan provided by the Commissioner of Environmental Protection under Section 22A-661. Lawn care pesticides are pesticides registered by the EPA and labeled according to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act for lawn, garden, and ornamental use. Lawn care pesticide does not include a microbial pesticide or biochemical pesticide registered with the EPA, horticultural soap or oil registered with the EPA, and does not contain any synthetic or synergist or a pesticide classified by EPA as an exempt material. The superintendent shall prepare and disseminate regulations for the implementation of this policy. And we have references to Connecticut general statutes and law, and are prepared to bring this for a first reading to our Board of Education. So Pastor AJ, if we may move on to our next and last policy for this morning.
Yes. Any comments or concerns on the last policy? All right, we're all set.
Thank you, sir. Our final policy this morning is soliciting funds from and by students. It's policy 1324. We realized it was a gap for us. We do have student fundraising in the 5,000 series, but this policy protects our students and our processes, clarifies and standardizes our processes with regards to soliciting funds from and by students. And Chief Penn is here with us this morning. Chief Penn, I don't know if you wanted to add any additional insights before we begin reading the policy.
No. Thank you, Dr. Silver, and good morning, everybody. Again, this definitely fills a gap that we noticed, and it came about from a request that we had from a particular program who wanted to start doing fundraising to augment some of the things that were available to students. And we went looking for a policy and realized we didn't have one. And so we've taken what is mostly the CABE model policy and added to it some language that we've cobbled together from a couple of other districts that we kind of liked, that we thought would be appropriate for Hartford and Hartford students as well. And we've tried to make it in a way that's not overly complicated. I would say that as well. But just to be able to provide guidelines to what we think is acceptable versus unacceptable, particularly with regard to student safety, right? We don't want small kids going out there necessarily door to door. We want to make sure that they're not fundraising to support something that the school or the district should be providing. It's really designed to be fundraising that goes above and beyond what would typically be available in the classroom. And I guess I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Chief Penn, what prompted this? What specifically prompted this policy? Was it a need for books? Was it a need for pens? Was it a need for a field trip? Was it a need?
No, it wasn't specific in the sense of looking for something like that. It was more geared around the person who runs our 18 to 21 program had approached me with looking for things for fundraisers to augment what their program was offering. And I said, let me get back to you, because I wanted to go and review the policy and be able to provide it to her and say, okay, as long as you're within these guidelines, you're allowed to fundraise. And that's when I realized we didn't have one. So that's what prompted the discussion and the need to go develop a policy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Continue.
Okay, thank you so much. This is policy 1324, community relations, soliciting funds from and by students. Fundraising activities may be approved by the superintendent of schools consistent with the following guidelines. Fundraising is in connection with the school-sponsored projects. Requests for approval of fundraisers shall be made and approved in writing on the form provided. Number 2, there are sufficient educational or financial benefits which accrue to the school and or students, either directly or indirectly, from the activity. Number 3, the mechanics or procedures of fundraising will neither be an unacceptable burden to teachers or other school staff members, nor subject the school to inappropriate risks or responsibilities in handling funds. Number 4, the fundraising mechanics or procedures will not subject students to inappropriate risks given the age and abilities of the students. Number 5, instructional time will not be used to conduct or promote fundraising activities, except in cases where it is an integral part of the curriculum. Number 6, school employees will not be approached during school hours for the purpose of soliciting funds or selling goods. Number 7, funds raised will not be used to pay for expenses that are considered part of the normal curriculum. And number 8, all monies raised through fundraising efforts must be deposited in the student activity fund for the respective school. Monies raised through fundraising efforts shall not be retained by the fundraising group or deposited in a personal or special purpose bank account. The policy concludes with the statement, there shall be no direct solicitation of funds by outside organizations from students except on specific approval of the superintendent. And our policies in alignment and support of this are the policies listed here. And we have a form that would be used as our regulation that would require identification of the organization or program, a contact person, the activity, the date of fundraising activity, whether or not it's school sponsored, whether or not it requires the superintendent's approval. If it's a gift, what the gift is, the value of the gift and donation, and the signatures by the superintendent and the principal. And that concludes our student fundraising policy.
Any Board Member Walker, any questions?
Not immediately. I'll make the comment that I mean, Chief Pennant, it looks like this is a great framework. It looks like the kind of document that would be modified as you come up against new situations that you can't imagine right now. But, you know, so I'm not going to try to create a question, but I assume you'll just modify it as you figure out situations.
Mr. Walker, I would expect to be coming back here perhaps on an annual basis as we start to log the one-off type issues that we encounter once we roll this out.
Yeah. So I'm good as a starting point. This is a good policy where we had none.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's gonna take different forms over the, over the years. But okay. I have no issue with this. I think it's a great idea, and it's us filling the gap. So Chief Penn, man, thank you. Thank you for your diligence, man. Appreciate you. You're the best. You're the best.
Thank
We
you.
got the best in Hartford Public Schools, so I appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Dr. Silver, anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, with that said, we have our somewhat marching orders. There'll be some stuff that we will get back from Attorney Mazurek. And this will all go for first reading, correct? Or second reading in our November board meeting, some of the stuff that we discussed here today. First reading? Okay. All right. I expect that the board meeting will have some level of engagement, particularly around the use of physical force, because I think that's a hot topic. So I'm interested to hear what is said. I do remember during our last public comment, someone did bring up something regarding physical force, and I hope that it was followed up on in the long public comment that we had on our last meeting. But if there is no one else or nothing else that needs to be said, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And this is probably the first meeting we're actually getting done at 10 o'clock, or before 10 o'clock. So I don't want to ruin that. So you all have a wonderful day, and thank you all so much for your time.
There we go.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.